Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to The People's Voice with Shabnam, Palesa, Mohamed on Salam Media. It is Sunday, the 15th of March, 2026. And in our next segment, we'll be speaking with former South African ambassador to the US and the founder of the World for All Foundation, Ebrahim Rasool. And we're talking about strategies to defend and strengthen Africa against the violence of empire. Ebrahim, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
It's wonderful to have you with us. We have about 20 minutes, so let's jump straight into it. I want to talk about, you must have seen this clip, Lula, the president of Brazil, and he was talking about military cooperation with South Africa. Yet our military, according to experts, including people on the inside of our military, say that we are not strong enough militarily. Let's have a look at this clip and let's hear your thoughts on how we need to strengthen our military strength across the African continent.
Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has urged South Africa to deepen defense cooperation, warning President Cyril Ramaphosa that both countries could face foreign invasion if they fail to strengthen their military capabilities. Speaking during Ramaphosa's state visit to Brasilia, Lula called for the two BRICS partners to combine their industrial and technological potential to produce defense equipment together, rather than relying on foreign arms suppliers.
So this is an important question, Ebrahim, for us to engage on. If we can just have Ebrahim back on screen there. This is such an important question for us to engage on. And, of course, given your, sometimes it feels like recent expulsion with great honor for naming the supremacist instinct in US or imperialist politics, we need effective strategies for African nations to assert our sovereignty and push back against imperial overreach, especially when the retaliation is often so swift, so personal, and so harsh. So, of course, we have to ensure that our voices aren't silenced by the threat of diplomatic or economic violence. But militarily, this is an area in which Africa needs strengthening. Your thoughts on that topic, including the words of President Lula?
Look, I think that President Lula, since the G20 meetings in Brazil, has been a strong advocate of going far more independent of superpowers or empire, as it is called. He raised the issue then of de-dollarization. He's now raising the issue of military strengthening and cooperation. And I think that what is coming together is a kind of all of the above strategy, of which military cooperation is one dimension of it. And most importantly, the idea of de-dollarization and exiting from the US financial system is absolutely critical, because it's that financial system that allows them to sanction people and countries. It's that financial system that cuts off aid, because we're all in the SWIFT system and everything is in dollars. And so by and large, we need a multi-pronged strategy. And those two are certainly there. I think strengthening the global architecture is absolutely critical. The idea of a BRICS bank to challenge what is happening in the World Bank. The idea, for example, of alternative sources of income to look after health. And I must say that what in 1 year President Trump has been able to do is that he has put the whole world to terms that you are not immune from my bullying. And therefore the world has responded by saying, maybe we do need alternatives. And so I think that while it may start with South Africa and Brazil, it may incorporate some BRICS countries, it may incorporate more countries of the global south, we should not be surprised that for their own good, there will be countries even from the global north who would want to join in this. But certainly, I think we saw how freaked they were when BRICS countries had a naval exercise. I think they're particularly freaked at what China is doing and whether the Chinese military would be available. They particularly disturbed that Russia may be collaborating with Iran on intelligence sharing. And so clearly it's a strategy that could work, but only as part of an all of the above strategy, as opposed to putting all our eggs only in a military basket.
Absolutely. So my second question, of course, would be related to that, because economic sovereignty comes with sovereignty over our natural resources for us as a country, for South Africa, but also across the entire continent. Glencore announced in February this year that they had sold 40% of their stake in the DRC Congo to White House-backed companies and oligarchs. Meanwhile, our own country, via Glencore, African Rainbow Minerals, and Exxaro, continue to sell coal to the apartheid Zionist settler colony called Israel. How are we to push back against the economics to strengthen our country and our continent when we are still selling our minerals to Zio imperialists? Isn't it time that the CEOs of companies like Glencore are held accountable at the International Criminal Court?
No, I think absolutely what we do need is for countries, in a sense, to disinvest from supporting the very power structures that visit destruction, genocide, and war on the whole world. And we can't, just for who we are as South Africa, the transition we've made from apartheid to democracy, the calls we've made on the world to disinvest from us at our own expense, I don't think that we can afford to be on that wrong side of history. I do think, however, that sometimes a call is very important, but I sometimes think that we forget the political education, the politicization, the awareness building that needs to go alongside the call. I think, for example, you can't make a call to boycott Coca-Cola products, but over Christmas weekend and in summer days, Coca-Cola trucks are offloading by the dozens in the townships, certainly of Cape Town. But it means that the intelligentsia, those who understand the politics of it, are losing the popular battle. So we've got to have two ways of doing it. And then most importantly, I think we also need to understand the strategic use of our critical minerals. And without going into a boring lesson, the United States, the first person that Donald Trump appointed in the White House was a critical mineral czar, because the United States has identified 50 critical minerals it needs to have and to procure if it is not to cede the AI technological revolution to China. Because by that time they realized that of the 50 critical minerals, about 12 of them, the United States is completely dependent on imports. For a further 14 of them, they need 50% to import, and that they need, for 12 of them or 11 of them, everything from China, and that China has, for example, grabbed 90% of the processing of critical minerals and rare earth elements. And so those are the kind of things that I think we need to be more discerning of, and particularly South Africa, who controls quite a few of the critical minerals, like platinum critical minerals, like manganese and so forth. Those are the ones that Donald Trump said, you don't need to pay tariffs on those, just send it to us. We need to be a lot smarter in Africa, in the global South, and with China, in order to work out a strategy to rebalance the globe in terms of the balance of power and forces in the world.
An informative conversation with Ebrahim Rasool. We'll be coming back straight after the ad break to talk about Sudan, health imperialism, telecommunications, and decolonizing education. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Recipes that everyone can help make. Right now, over 150 million children around the world are orphaned, facing hunger, hardship, and uncertainty. With Islamic Relief's Orphan Sponsorship Program, you can provide a child with access to education, nutritious food, essential healthcare, and a safe home. Your sponsorship is not just support, it's hope, security, and a brighter future. Be the reason an orphan child smiles again. Sponsor an orphan today with Islamic Relief.
Freedom Stationery supply Marlin and Marlin Kids pens to me and my school friends. They supply just about everything we need to help us get a better education, from books to files to rulers. In fact, any any accessory we need. Freedom Stationery. Education for the nation. What does accessory mean?
World-class financial services only at Sapphire Global, your financial partner. If you are looking for Islamic, Sharia, and ethical financial products, look no further. Sapphire Global offers a wide range of financial service offerings from short-term to life and investments. A full-service center with all financial requirements under one brand. Our highly skilled and experienced consultants are ready to help protect your financial future. Contact us on 041 001 0184 or visit our website on www.sapphireglobalfs.com. Sapphire Global is an authorized financial services provider.
This Ramadan, as we prepare to break our fast, spare a thought for the millions of families around the world who have nothing on their tables. You can change that. For many, you are their hope. For just 1,590 Rand, you can provide a Ramadan food parcel to feed a family of 5 for the entire month. Help Muslim Hands continue serving humanity. Give your zakat and sadaqah at muslimhands.org.za.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African experience. For reservations, call now on 042-203-1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
You are listening to Salam Media live from our headquarters in South Africa. This is Salam Media, keeping you company this Ramadan.
Welcome back to The People's Voice on Salam Media. We are in conversation with Ebrahim Rasool, former South African ambassador to the US, and of course, the founder of the World for All Foundation. Ebrahim, we've got 8 minutes. Let's see how much we can squeeze in. I want to talk about Sudan within this context of defending Africa from the violence of empire. What we're seeing happening currently, and reports are also emerging, that the genocide in Sudan and the violence that the Sudanese are experiencing appears to be at least mildly dissipated currently, with the government gaining ground. And that's because the UAE is unable to supply the weapons on the scale that it has been doing, being damaged and or distracted by Iran's response to Zio imperialism in West Asia. What needs to be done further to support Sudan, but also to challenge our trade and economic ties with the UAE, which is as complicit as Israel, which is supplying weapons to the RSF?
So very clearly, I think that the situation in Sudan is dissipating, and I think the connections you've made between UAE being bogged down in its own region and unable to supply, I think has a lot to do with it. But you are dealing with imperialisms at a variety of levels. You've got the arch-imperialists, you've got the regional gendarme, and then you've got sub-imperialists all doing the work. that we see unfolding amongst us. And so clearly, the first base of all of that is that we must get African countries a lot more independent of either the superpower, the gendarme, or the sub-imperialists. And then secondly, we've got to understand how it works. I think Africa has a lot of developmental backlogs and needs, and these are the kind of soft wedges that come into Africa. We see that all over the show, and that's why we can be very surprised that the African Union, a majority could have made Israel an observer member of the African Union, because they build these kind of captivities of presidents, because they deal with a lot of the developmental needs. So we need to be able, and South Africa has tried, for example, to have a development fund like a smaller version of the USAID that could do developmental work across Africa and deal with some of those developmental backlogs, but we don't have the kind of money to be able to do it. And so what we need to then do is to also strengthen the institutions within Africa, whether they are democratic, human rights-based, freedom-embracing institutions. We need to do that as the antidote to leaders being captured by imperialists. And I say this because we underestimate how there is a massive push. So for me, the turning point wasn't anything I said almost a year ago in Washington about the supremacist instinct. The turning point was the day South Africa lost 18 soldiers in the Eastern DRC against a proxy force who was ensuring that critical minerals and rare earth elements were going onto the black market, back to the manufacturing bases in the West. And when South Africa lost 18 soldiers on that day, that was the day when the US saw how serious South Africa was about not compromising the critical minerals of Africa. And that was the day when we moved out, they moved in and signed the deals for direct takeoff of critical minerals from the DRC. So I think we must look after our continent as our first base of response to global imperialism.
Absolutely. And my last two questions for you. The one is focused on Starlink and similar types of technologies. No doubt you would have heard about the incursion of Palantir, which is said to be occupying the US quite unironically, perhaps. But Elon Musk and the oligarchy are intent to get those technologies into the global south and into Africa in particular. And South Africa is certainly in the crosshairs. Of course, we know Starlink is not only a communications tool, but more than that, it is surveillance. And Elon Musk himself has said that Starlink could be used as weapons from space. What is the appetite across the African continent to push back against Starlink? And South Africa in particular, having Lesotho very much inside our country, how are we going to resist Starlink and Palantir, and what alternatives do you think can be developed at a rapid pace?
Shabnam, the irony, of course, is that Starlink is the property of an ex-South African, and Palantir is the property of an ex-South African, Peter Thiel. Palantir has just secured the global intelligence network for the whole of the CIA to exercise global intelligence across the world. And of course, Starlink is making itself available for African countries. And it's almost as if the purchase of Starlink is the precondition for trade with the United States. And so that was the pressure that South Africa was under. And of course, when South Africa negotiates this, it needs to negotiate, as we try to do, what are the ethical guardrails for a technology coming in? How do we, in a sense, immunize ourselves against the intelligence components of any technology? That's not just for Starlink, that's for all AI that we need to come in. The battle between North America or the USA and Europe, for example, about AI, is that Europe wants to put ethical and regulatory frameworks in place, whereas America wants a free reign. So we know what the battle is. It is the battle for data. It is the battle for intelligence. It is the battle for weaponizing technology in a way that is there. And therefore, I think it is dangerous that Starlink is cheaply coming into Africa, right in South Africa, in Lesotho, as you point out, right even in places like Zanzibar and other neighbors. And how long can South Africa hold out? The long-term immunization is to be able to control the regulatory frameworks and to patrol the regulatory frameworks so that we are guarded against something fairly pernicious.
My last question for you, Ebrahim. Kolani, can you bring up that article on screen? This is reported on Al Jazeera. The title there, US's new scramble for Africa is biomedical imperialism. And the subheader, US health agreements across the continent promise funding, but demand access to sensitive data and pathogen samples with few guarantees of equitable benefit sharing. Really a must-read article. Zimbabwe having pulled out of a proposed $367 million US health funding agreement after objecting to provisions requiring broad American access to sensitive health data. Further on telling us that the terms demand extensive sharing, surveillance data, and pathogen samples. And of course, we know what we know about bioweaponry and the Zayo-US empire. Kenya also suspending a similar $2.5 billion agreement last December after a legal challenge, contending that it could expose health data without adequate safeguards, and so on. And so a very interesting article. I would certainly encourage people to read it. But this is biomedical imperialism, Ebrahim. How does Africa push back?
Look, I think you've made the case. The article is compelling. I'm very happy that Zimbabwe has turned its back on it, that Kenya has suspended it. We should all do that because it's the very point that I made earlier. Africa has backlogs, developmental backlogs, that is being exploited, and unscrupulous leaders who don't have far-reaching visions can easily sign onto that for the quick buck, but sell their country down the drain in the long term. And therefore, what we need to do is we need the African Union to really be looking at the whole array, critical minerals, biomedical, developmental aid, everything. Look at all of that and basically say, how do we make ourselves independent so that we can be the determiners of what we want and how we want it and when we want it and how much we want.
Shukran, Ibrahim Rasool, for joining us today on The People's Voice. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Well, there you have it, an informative, empowering show today. First up, we talked to Nkobile Mhlongo from the Economic Freedom Fighters, and then, of course, former Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool on matters related to South Africa and Africa's peace and sovereignty. Until our next show, take care. Assalamu alaikum.